So we are following up on 2 previous sessions. We did short videos talking about topics in self-directed education and deschooling and how adults can be better partners with kids, more in equity and co-creation rather than kind of just getting them to do what we want them to do. And this is in lead up to it's examples of the kinds of topics that we talk often about with parents and teachers and learning facilitators we work with that are trying to be partners in self-direction with youth, right? And so plug for that, those 2 classes, different times coming up in January, on January 8th, 4 sessions each, 90 minutes each session. And we'll provide a link to register for those. So we decided that we would talk about one of the topics that comes up a lot for us, right, is when, what do we do when our kids, our students, our children start something and then don't finish it? Like, what's our role there? The tendency I find is that most people think that we should make them is often the word that is used, right? And we're coming from this idea that, look, ultimately, it really should be up to each individual how they spend their time, right? If we're coming from a place of really mutual respect of the right to self-direction as a principle. And yet, we also have kind of hopes and needs, as we do in any relationship, and to honor those, sometimes we might engage that other person around that, depending on the situation. And ultimately, I would say, I guess, in some kids, we would want to be really careful to not say anything about it, right? And as I think you talk about, is that it really depends on, who the person is, right? Even if it was, and one of the things that we'll talk about more in the classes is that really, neither you nor I would approach this differently, really, if it was an adult partner or friend than we would with a kid, right? And so what would that approach look like? How is it different, depending on the type of person that we're dealing with and the situation? And what are some of the dangers and downsides of pressuring, et cetera? So what do you think about that situation?
Yeah, you nailed it, Aaron. I always like to think when I'm considering saying something to a kid that I work with, would I say this to a friend? Would I say this to my partner? Would I say this to any adult? And why? Why am I thinking I should say this to this young person? So I think that's a really important thing to circle back to is, would you say this to an adult, given all the preconceptions we have about our relationships with kids that we're trying to undo? I think that's a really solid place to come back to when you're considering your own decisions about your relationships with young people. And then also, it really depends on the person because, as you said, some kids might be, or some adults even, might be choosing to stop something they picked up because they're not interested anymore. Some people we know get to the first really difficult part, really big hurdle, and then maybe they give up without support. So maybe we really know that about someone and we know they need some sort of support, or at least we can offer that. So it really depends on the person you're working with, and what I would do with my stepson might be different than what you would do with your daughter or one of your sons, or it's going to be different for everyone. So you have to go back to that relationship you have with that person and what you know about them before making that decision. And then when you do go up to them and say something, hopefully as non-coercive as you can make it sound, like, hey, I noticed you stopped doing that thing. Do you want to tell me about why? What happened there? I'm curious. Everything you've done with them or how you've responded to that person up until then will inform how they feel when you approach them. So you also have to know what the foundation of your own relationship is, and not expect that your goal in this conversation is to get them to do what you want to do, or do what you want them to do, which we talked about before. But the goal is actually, I want to find out what's going on and support you in whatever way you need, even if that's just stepping back and being like, great, you're not doing that anymore. Sounds awesome. Glad you made that choice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a really important point with all of this work, is that if we approach kind of nonviolent communication or non-coercive practices with anybody. And really, ultimately, our goal is to manipulate them into doing what we want. Other human beings can sense that. And then we just get sort of tagged as hypocritical and untrustworthy if that's really our intention. And so really committing to that honoring of the right to self-direction, I also find is incredibly important. And when you mention relationship, so one of the things that I've found in some of my own relationships, and then also hearing from a number of other adults, is that sometimes any adult interest can make children not want to continue what they're doing at all, even if it's good. Like, oh, I noticed you're doing that. Here's some supplies I bought you to keep doing it. Done. Right. So I've heard those stories before. I haven't encountered those myself, but firsthand from parents who have experienced that. And another one that I definitely have experienced and have heard a lot of is if we aren't in right relationship and we're constantly trying to pressure people to do things, often they'll stop doing things just because they know we want them to do them. So if we aren't in the right kind of relationship place with people, then our playing our hand that it's something that we would like to even say, boy, I would love to see you get better at that because I know the joys of being good at, say, music or something. And I really want that for you. If we have not been a good, equitable partner with that person, they might just say, oh, you want me to do it? Done. I'm not doing it anymore. But if we are in good relationship, and that example you gave where maybe they just hit a rough spot and it's hard, right? They've hit it and it's become hard and they haven't been getting the joy out of it yet. And so they don't know the value of sticking through. I'll have parents or teachers ask me, well, shouldn't we make them? Because otherwise, how will they get there? Right. And to that, I would always say, no, we should not make them. Because first of all, that's not how humans learn to stick with stuff. That's how humans learn to resent other human beings and to learn how to use power to force other people to do things. So we know that doesn't actually teach that. But if we are a good partner with another human being, and we've established that relationship where we do challenge each other, right? Then I find what I recommend in those situations would be just like you said, hey, I noticed that you've stopped doing that. I wonder what's going on for you. I'm curious. I really enjoyed listening to you play or whatever it might be. And then if it turns out that it was, well, it just kind of started getting hard and boring. Then, a number of ways to approach that, which might be, hey, I've experienced that a lot myself before. And I also have paused things.
Taking a break from something.
So we're resuming after a quick pause here. So we were talking about sharing when we have encountered things that got hard for us and how sometimes, one of the things I'll ask parents too is say, have you ever not finished something you started? Would it be hypocritical to say, hey, you must finish what you start? I think it's important to maybe just share our experience with that in the past, both that we have also given up sometimes and maybe even regrets we've had around that. Like, boy, I wish I had stuck with language or music or whatever it was, because now I wish so much I was able to do it. Or there was a time I really pushed through even when it was really, really hard. And boy, am I glad I did. And here's why. And just want to share that with you because I would just love for you to, get to that point of really feeling good about what you're doing, like being able to enjoy it, right? To play the music or speak the language or whatever it is you're doing and to enjoy it. But I also recognize that, maybe you come back to it later, or maybe you never do, and that's okay. But I wanted to share that, I understand that thing about things getting difficult. And I would also just caution to maybe notice, and I've had this conversation with students and my own kids, and friends, adults, like, hey, have you, if in our lives we back away from everything, every time we hit something that feels difficult, I wonder if then we will be able to achieve the things we want for our life. Like sometimes, I think we do find that it is good to push through those pain points, or boring points or whatever it might be, and the rewards can be really high. Totally up to you. I just wanted to share that, and also like share that concern, because I've seen in some people's lives when they never push through, they end up not achieving some of the stuff they want to. And is there anything I can do to help in this situation? Like would, in any way, anything you can think of, including leaving you alone. Right? Like, would that be the best thing for me to do for you right now? And that's the kind of space that I've noticed myself. What I've noticed with that tendency of my kids is that they do things for 3 months intensively and then they stop over and over again. It's 3 months and then they stop. And what I found is that they usually circle back. And from stories from lots of other people, if you push and they continue, they're likely when they stop the next time to never pick it up again.
Yeah.
And so even with just that, like, even if it was a totally selfish goal of, I want them to play piano, it's probably best to just be a solid, equitable partner. They're probably more likely to pick it up back later and really pursue it of their own interest than to get to that place I would want them to be at by forcing them to do it. And I've seen that so many times now, that I've really come to trust it, even though I still have that instinct every time I see my kid kind of stop doing something. Yeah, what other, or any comments on that, or what other kind of types of stopping, or people or relationships do you think, have you seen that in, or think that we should talk about, Bria?
Yeah, a couple things. First, everything you said about those conversations those are really honest, pretty direct conversations, and I've had them with lots of different young people, lots of different times. But I would never ever say any of those things to a young person I didn't have the foundation for. And I know we've already talked about relationship, but I just want to reiterate that you have to know you have a foundation of trust and equity before, like, these conversations don't, like what Aaron says, doesn't necessarily build that foundation of trust and equity if you're kind of pushing a little bit before you have it. So I wouldn't start with that conversation when you've never built trust or shown that you
It's out of the blue.
trust.
Or if you do, it's never too late to start equitable conversations, I would say. Just be ready for the response to be screw you, right? Like if that was the first time, right? Or like, what's wrong with you? I will walk away. But like 10 conversations later, that one might like end up, reaping some reward in terms of relationship, I would say. But yeah, it's, going from forcing kids to do stuff under threat of punishment all the time to, hey, what do you think I noticed, is definitely going to get some, you got to prove that over and over again that you really mean it. Otherwise, the kids think you're playing them and you're going to flip back again.
Totally. Sure. Yeah. Totally. Yeah. So I guess I'm not saying don't say those things, just be completely willing to give up your desired outcome. And hear the like, screw you.
Yeah, absolutely. What would you say, sorry, Brie, what would you say if it was kind of, you're wanting to embark on a new way of relating to your kid and they choose to stop doing something? How would you, that's an interesting scenario, right? Like what is the first step down kind of switching that approach, our approach with kids without, too much of that conversation where they're like, I've never heard any of this before from you. What's going on? Right? How do you, like in this scenario, what would a first step look like, do you think, that, weeks later might lead to the kind of relationship you want? That's a really interesting thing.
A lot of times I just think it's shorter. It's like, hey, I noticed you stopped doing this thing. What's going on? And they're like, I did it. I don't want to talk about it. And then you leave it. Like there's less of that follow up of,
Yeah.
well, I know when I stop doing something, then I feel
Yeah,
this way.
right.
Like that, just let it go for now
Mhm.
because they're not ready to hear that from you because they don't believe that you're in an equitable partnership
Yeah.
yet. So a lot of it is just accepting the no quicker, I think, because then they learn, oh, they actually are accepting what I'm choosing, and then they become more open to hearing more sides and more ideas and more
Yeah.
support.
And to follow up on that, I think you're absolutely right, because one of the first things that we have to learn in these relationships is that we're trusted.
Mm-hmm.
And if we haven't done that yet, and it follows with a bunch of like, reasons why they might want to continue, then it's just, we haven't established the trust yet. And simply, we've got to acknowledge and then back away
Mm-hmm.
I think, for kids to notice that we backed away. Right. So I love
Yes.
that idea of, hey, I noticed that, and then leaving it. And for a kid that's used to being constantly badgered, that's going to really stand out.
Yeah.
Right. And then the next time we come to them and say, hey, I noticed this thing. I wonder if you'd like to talk about it. They're much more likely to say yes.
Right.
And if the last time we did it was, hey, I noticed you stopped, and then 20 minutes of, can I try to convince you to keep going?
I'm going to let you and pretend it's based in equity.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, no, that's
Yeah.
a really good point. And I like that. I think that's such a critical piece, because sometimes as adults, uh, we don't know how to get started in shifting a relationship that's been so power-based.
Mm-hmm.
And if we don't start slowly and subtly, it can, quote unquote, not work.
Yeah.
Right. And then we get frustrated that, what sort of worked before isn't working anymore. And now nothing's working. So I think that's a great point. So maybe to wrap this one up, because lots more time to talk about stuff if you join the classes. We'll also try to do more of these videos. I don't see a reason to not, right, Bria?
Yeah.
But kind of to summarize, forcing kids to do things, or forcing anybody to do things, doesn't teach anything good, I don't think. And it can teach a lot of bad stuff. Right.
Yeah.
And if we really would like to see, like, boy, I really wish for you that you would continue to play the piano, because I would love for you to know the joy of being proficient in an instrument and being able to play it. Partly because I wish I had done that, or I did do it and I know the joy of it, or whatever the reason might be. I think it's important to know that it's okay for us to share our hopes and dreams for our loved ones. But it's really important to recognize that as an adult, we come with a lot of prepackaged power, and we almost have to back off extra in how we approach sharing what it is that we would like for somebody else. And it's really good to start, as you were saying, Bria, with simply, I noticed, if there's anything I can do to help, let me know, or whatever it might be, and then leaving it at that. And just doing that a number of times until it really has become clear that there is trust, and there is that equity, and then invite conversation from that point. I really like that description you gave of that entry point. Bria.
Yeah. And just being genuine about it. It's not a game where we're trying to learn how to manipulate them better. And if you're playing it like that, or you're seeing it like that, it's really not going to work, and it's really going to harm the relationship,
Yeah.
because ultimately for me, it's more about having a good relationship than it is about figuring out how I can nicely get him to learn what I think he should
Yeah.
learn. Like, it's not about that at all. It's about having a good, trusting relationship, because that's what I really care about.
Absolutely. Yeah. Relationship first, right?
Yeah.
And if there's anything, I actually get that question sometimes, like, when is it okay to kind of put relationship second? And I think those instances are really, really, really rare. And you can always come back to it, like truck barreling down on kid in the middle of the street.
Right.
Like,
Yep.
I'm gonna put my hands on you and move you without asking first.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
But like, we're gonna
Yeah.
work that out later. Like, hey,
Yes.
I'm so sorry that I yelled at you and then grabbed you, and here's why.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's pretty much the only times that I come up with, like, when is it okay to kind of sacrifice healthy relationship with someone.
Yeah.
Um,
Agree.
yeah, Bria, thanks so much. Always fun. We'll post this online. We hopefully will see some folks in those online live workshop sessions starting January 8th. And I'll talk to you sometime soon, Bria.
Yeah. Bye, Aaron.